Breaking news. Speaker Mike Johnson recently oversaw the passing of H.R. 1, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Analysts at the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimate $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts so that Trump can afford tax cuts such that the rich get richer. I hear we just got a video of Senate Republicans drafting the Big Beautiful Bill. Let's take a look. Oh, no wonder why this bill is so messed up. The seance is using a septagram, not a pentagram. Republicans are evil and stupid.
It's the root of all evil, of strife and of
I don't pay a whole lot of attention to headlines. I think they're more interesting studies, my view, in like propaganda and manipulation techniques. But beyond that, I really don't lend a whole lot of credence to the actual substance. To make a proper opinion, I think you really need to look at the root. Look at like the primary source, as it were, the language itself in the bill. Look at that and then form an opinion. That's kind of how I think is best to operate. And I think that's what this podcast is going to kind of try to do. It's going to try to add to the conversation. So a lot of words have been spilled. A lot of claims have been made about what this bill is going to mean in terms of Medicaid, spending cuts, what's going to do kind of on the tax side, all this stuff, right? Man, what do you think? You kind of have that mind?
I'm right there with you.
Great. Yeah.
My opinion on the fake news media.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. And, that's one of the reasons why we want to do this, and we want to focus on primary sources and the details. So now, obviously, we can't do the whole thing. This thing's like, it's a monster. I think I saw the PDF or something. It was like 800 some odd pages. Can't cover that. And I think the most we can do is just get a general sense of the thing, maybe cruise through the table of contents, and then drill down into sort of how this thing works at a couple layers. And, we were complaining, you and I were complaining for a long time about spending cuts. This is a spending problem. It's a spending problem. So we're not going to look too much, or I'm not going to take you through the tax cuts so much, although that is, a huge part of it. Really, I'm curious to see what exactly the spending cuts look like for Medicaid. Like, what does that mean to cut Medicaid? Do you know what that means, Joe? I didn't really know what it meant. This is it. You can download it in HTML format, which I've done here. It makes navigating it a little bit easier than just like the PDF. But here it is. And I think kind of one of the first thing you'll notice, not that we're going to read this all the way through, but I like how they say, the bill that passed the House of Representatives entitled blah, 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 do pass with the following change. Delete everything and insert this. Yeah, I like that face, Joe. That's it is sort of, we're going to look at some of the legal stuff that they do, but it's pretty funny to see like how they actually implement this stuff from like a legal perspective. And again, I'm not a lawyer. So this is looking at it very much from the outside. Maybe this is like totally standard practice. So I'll just give you kind of like we can just generally.
We're up to a good start here
because it's beyond us. But yeah, we can just react to sort of some of the observations we see sort of in the legal world. So yeah, delete everything after this word and insert the following. Now the first thing I think that shows up.
What is the first word?
Yeah,
in
amendment? No. I don't know. We'd have to look at
in the Senate of the United States.
God damn it. I'm going to have to actually find this.
In section 1, table of contents.
Okay. We're not going to spend time on this, Joe. We got to move on. We got a lot to cover. But
I thought we were going page by page here. We want to really understand it, right?
I very clearly said that we can't do that. We're just going to drill into a couple things.
I thought I'd try one last time.
But look, the first thing you do, just like scrolling through the table of contents, is you can clearly see, I would say that this is a Republican bill. So like you just kind of scroll down a little bit and you just run across this like wall of enhancement of Department of Defense resources. That's what I'm talking about. Clearly it's a Republican bill. And you scroll down like a little farther and it's just like rescission of funding, and then it's all this like
spending
green
cuts
stuff. So okay, so that's like the first thing. This is a Republican bill. This is what they look like. it almost feels as though a bunch of these different committees and, specifically like the Republicans on them are just making this like living, growing list of stuff that they want to do. And then when, the first time a Republican Congress gets in there with a Republican president, it all just goes on to this one bill. Anyway, but that's just, purely feeding off of this just table of
Which
contents.
is like kind of funny because like both chambers are furiously working on this thing, all their staff, like thousands of people, when like the Democrats are like just doing nothing that whole time. So I don't think they even tried to do anything. It's like it'd be nice if there was some sort of team effort here, but I get the feeling it was just completely one-sided.
So this is a finance-focused podcast. Want to take a little stop here on the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Now, don't ask me what, Section 3004 Appropriations for Defense Production Act, what's that doing in there? But I know we covered the CFPB a bit, and let's take a look at what they're going to do with the funding cap for the CFPB. Like, what does that look like at just the base level?
I think that was one of the things that Ted Cruz talked about after his IORB example.
Yeah. And this is the language. This is the language. This is what they do. Section whatever, funding cap. So section, this of the Consumer Financial Protection Act of 2010, they give a link, is amended by striking 12 and inserting 6.5. That's it. That's all you got to do. So like the first thing we kind of need to learn, these bills is really interesting because it's a super long bill, but it's not like they're writing anything like new. They're all just changing old legislation, right? So that's
just a list of things to do.
Yeah, list of stuff to change in other bills, or what we'll see later. A lot of it is change in regulation, which is interesting. But like specifically, what are they doing? All they're doing is changing a 12 to a 6.5 right here, A to A3. I've pulled this up already. Now, what this specifically has to do with is funding for the CFPB. And the way it works is here, what the CFPB does, the way it gets its funding is directly from the Federal Reserve System. That's one of the big things that the Republicans do not like about it, is the fact that it's not appropriated through Congress. It's done by the Federal Reserve. But there is language in law that limits the amount of funding that can go there. And it's limited here. After it was found in like 2010 or something. So it would say there's a cap to the total operating expenses of the Federal Reserve System, times 10%. That's the cap. And then later then the next year it's going to be 11%. And then 12% everything thereafter. That's the cap. And what this the big beautiful bill did is it came in, it swung in, and it changed that 12% cap to a 6.5% cap.
Pretty substantial.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, I mean,
cut it in half.
Imagine if you're working there and you hear the entire organization now is half the amount of funding.
Yeah, and you can imagine that this is a cap, but they're going to push that. Every year they're going to try to justify why they need the full 12%. Couple things here. One is, that's how they kind of write the laws. You kind of, lawyer up and they change this and that. But the other thing, that's like what a spending cut to me looks like, right? That's like a proper spending cut.
Right.
Now, we can put our opinion about the CFPB aside just for a second here. We can just focus on cuts.
That's a cut.
That's a cut.
Okay. More money going back to the Treasury instead of CFPB.
I want to take a little side effect. I have a little personal interest in all things space. So we're going to take a little side thing. And obviously a big bit of fallout, a bit of news from this had to do with the, Musk-Trump divorce. And it really happened to do at the end of this bill. And if you were looking at stories, a lot of it, a lot of the language around it had to do with, and from Musk himself, was that the spending was just out of control. We're just going to, put ourselves in debt, yada, yada, yada. We've said this 1,000 times. Trump would also go in and say, we cut his EV, tax credit, and he's really upset about that. One of the things that they're not talking about, and what I found when I was just scrolling through here, is this one. Section 40004, space launch and reentry licensing and permitting user fees. 509, whatever, is amended by adding. So they're adding a new section here. They're not changing anything, suggesting that this wasn't here before. So what they're sticking at the end of this is this bit of language. Space launch and reentry licensing and permitting fee. And then what it does, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but in my estimation, they're going to charge a launch fee. So they're going to have to pay the federal government a launch fee, and it's going to be done in two ways. One is just a flat rate, and the other one is a certain number of cents per pound of payload to orbit. Or I don't even think it says specifically to orbit. It just says the payload. Although most of the time, if you're putting something in space, they mean it to orbit. So what those numbers are, they're looking for 2026, it's 25 cents per pound to orbit. And I think Falcon 9, which is really the workhorse of Elon Musk's SpaceX, I think it can get about 50,000 pounds to orbit if it's just low Earth orbit. And I think what they're doing is about 180 or something launches a year. So, we're talking millions of dollars in fees, I think, every year. And that's just going to go up. I mean, for whatever reason, they sort of ladder these payments. They sort of ramp up the price just to kind of get them warmed up, maybe not shake the market too much. I don't know why they do this, but they start at 25%. You can just see how they ramp it up. And at the end, it's going to be $1.50 per pound. Now, remember, I think Musk, this is kind of a big deal because in some ways, this is, again, a little bit of a side note, but I think Musk is trying to get the cost, his unit of metric, the one that he wants, the one that he's focused on in order to get open up Mars, is the dollar per kilogram, I think he says, dollar per unit weight to orbit. That's the metric he's trying to get down. And I think he's getting down to something like $100, or maybe he's tens of dollars. I forget exactly what it is, but this is flying right in the face of that.
What is it currently? Do you know? A dumb Google search. It said between $2,000 to $2,500 estimated per pound of payload for Falcon 9.
Per pound. Okay, that sounds right. They want to get that down by a factor of 10 or 100.
At least 10, I think. Yeah. But 25 cents on 2,000, 25 cents on 2,500. One last thing is I'm thinking about that. So that's a tax increase.
Right.
Right. So it's all this is focused on.
It's not technically tax. It's fees or whatever. But yeah, that's going to be upping revenue.
Something the federal government, something that the federal government makes you pay. I don't know, call it what you want, right? But this is all about rolling back prior tax credits. This one is imposing new ones.
Yes. There's no way it's going to be all of one or the other. And there are definitely some new sources of revenue here, this being one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just in general, because the word tax increase is just such a toxic term. And I had never even heard about that part, but that's a tax increase. But like we talked about in that previous episode, that effect is just that amount we were just talking about. It's, less than, it's 1/1000th. That amount is going to do nothing to the, the trajectory of the overall debt.
You're implying that it might just be a political thing? It might just stick it to
Well,
stick it
no,
to
I mean, I don't know. Could be. But, why do they do any of these things? I just don't know, the back office staffer thing they have to do. It's all right, if we want some more credits here, we have to fill the hole within our little subsector of the bill that we're working on in this senator's office or something like that. They have to move things around to hit some sub target. Because whenever these things get debated, you always hear about the holdouts that come to, the head of the Senate or the Speaker of the House and say, here's this part that we can't, that my district can't budge on.
And I always kind of read some of these things, and I'm wondering if it isn't sort of driven by lobbyists, You know what I mean? Like would be a huge boon to like Boeing and some of the other big SpaceX competitors that aren't really competitors anymore because SpaceX is just completely dominated. They would love that part. There's other language in here, and we won't. I won't dive into it, but I was reading this, I remember, and thinking like, very strangely, it was talking explicitly about like paying certain contracts. Like we're going to go ahead and we're going to like allocate this amount of money to like this part of the Artemis program. And the Artemis and all that stuff is all won by Boeing. Remember that? And it just read kind of like, okay, I'm sure Boeing people maybe had a hand in this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like to your point about like what's going on in the behind the scenes.
Right.
Can't help but like someone somewhere had the ear, made a whole lot of noise and was complaining, and they got it in there. You just see fingerprints like that. This is total speculation, but it's the best we can do, without actually being in the room.
Again, not speculate or, don't want to speculate, but I would be surprised if zero occurrences of something like that happened in the making of this bill.
Yeah. You got to listen to people like, I think Dean Phillips, I really respect. He's a Democrat. And I think he's sort of got a bit attuned to that. He doesn't really like that. How like on the same day you can be taken out to lunch before voting on such and such, a bill or something.
Their lives for Congress to do nothing as wealthy industries shower millions upon millions of campaign cash on the very committee members who set the rules for their industries. And then Congress allows each party to collect dues from those committee members to fund their campaigns. It's legalized corruption, and it's unacceptable. My father and 1 million Americans did not sacrifice their lives for Congress to enable two private corporations, the two major parties, to maintain a virtual monopoly on our democracy.
Here's finance, a bunch of tax stuff. Again, what he wanted to do here was just extend his tax cuts that, he put in place in like 2018 or whatever. Not going to focus on that. What I wanted to do now was really just go through, kind of focus on the spending cuts. So there are a couple places you can do that. One is you can go to this place, Committee for Responsible Budgets. This is a .org, so it's not a government. Take that as you like, but then they would have their own sort of calculation. I couldn't really figure out where exactly these numbers came from. They get a link here, and it gives to an Excel sheet that looks to be from the CBO. But the numbers don't, I don't know. I couldn't exactly, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it because I wasn't, looking to reconcile this stuff. But just as a matter of source. Yeah. So, okay. So I want to get to really the juiciest part, and that has to do sort of the Medicaid cuts. All right. So just first off, Energy and Commerce Committee, for whatever reason, is sort of what oversees the cuts to Medicaid. And this is sort of their estimates, I suppose, 336. But let's go, one level deeper here. Let's look at what the CBO has. That link that I showed earlier that goes to a Excel sheet, that's this. And they really break it down into some detail. Like they'll go like section by section and they provide their estimate. I do not know how they come up with this. I think that's a very critical question, but I can't examine it because I don't know. But you'll see, there are a bunch of pages to this. And I want to zoom into specifically the $1 trillion that keeps getting mentioned for the Medicaid cuts. And I think where they're getting that number from, is at the end of this section, all of this is like right here. I think that's what they're talking about. And if you just kind of scroll up, sorry to move around so much, but you'll see the different section, their numbers. So things like requirement to establish Medicaid community engagement requirements for certain individuals. This is one of the biggest, hottest topics here because they're saying, you now have to make, in order to be eligible for Medicaid, you have to go back to work. That's sort of the short of it. But there are loads of these, preventing wasteful spending, moratorium on implementation of rule related to staffing standards for long-term care facilities under the Medicare and Medicaid programs, right? So again, just as something of a case study, let's just dive into this one real quick. So let's look at the actual language first. So first off, I think this must have been from like the House version of the bill because you can find this exact language It's 44121. That's what this section here. But this exact title is under 7, quadruple 1 in the other one we were looking at. So again, we are under subtitle B, Health, Chapter 1, Medicaid, reducing fraud and improving enrollment processes. A whole bunch of stuff. So this all is included into what they're calling cuts. Let's just zoom into this one. No particular reason. So this is the language, and a couple things to point out here. So like what this section is actually doing, all it's trying to adjust a specific rule or a regulation. Like it's not a law. They're trying to find like a specific regulation. And the way they do it is they say, starting from now until September 30th, 2034, you are not going to implement, administer, or enforce the amendments made by the final rule published, and then they cite it. They title it. So this rule, this title here, had made the following sections, and you are not going to enforce those two things. Right?
After 2034.
No, from now until 2034. 2034. So that's like the other kind of interesting thing. They don't just say like scratch it forever. They make it a moratorium. It's like
we're not changing the law. We're just over this time period.
You're gonna stop for a little bit. Now I don't know why they do that. There's got to be some legal reason. I'd be interested to know sort of what the legal theory is behind there, or what the strategy is. Maybe you just like
common.
Can't. It's very common. They do that a lot. This language shows up a lot. You can even
like compared to, decades past, like, is this a newer practice? Because some of the big campaign things, the no tax on tips and overtime, that's only for 4 years. Like, I got to imagine that's just a pure cost thing. It's just, you just can't stomach it indefinitely.
Oh, I don't know. Interesting point. But I don't know why they do that. And let's zoom into what exactly is going on in like section 483.35. So what they're doing here is they're just like striking this whole, correct me if I'm wrong, they're striking this whole section. And what this is, nursing services, they must have sufficient sufficient staff, and they define exactly what that means. They must meet or exceed a certain number of hours per resident day for total nurse staffing, a minimum of 55 hours per resident for a registered nurse. Nurse aides are going to be more of them. And, you can find in the write-up of the rule, they would say things like, we have found through studies that, more nursing is better, stuff like that. And that like, this is a reasonable number. And they're just going to strike it. Now, how this gets translated to, this number of dollars is not, it's not clear. But presumably this would save money.
So you're cutting funding, but you're also cutting regulation.
Well, you're not cutting funding though, right? This is kind of one of the big points.
Isn't this part of the spending cuts that we're talking about?
These are okay. Good question, Joe. So like the CBO estimates that by cutting that section, that the amount of spending that's going to happen is going to decrease, because I guess presumably they're assuming that a lot of nurses are going to be fired. But this is not like the same kind of spending cut that we saw earlier with the CFPB. You know what I mean? I mean, they're changing some rules and regulations, and then, they make an estimate as to what that actually means in terms of money saved. But they're not like concrete savings, so to say. They're not in the bag. These are just estimates.
It's just so purely as a result of a regulation change, not a budgetary change.
Take all this with a grain of salt. All you can really do is just look at what the regulation is doing, just cutting, this requirement on kind of nursing staff, and then form an opinion at that level. And to do that, I would say it doesn't sound great. In general, I'm much more of a less regulation kind of person. We're getting down to the sort of where our philosophical ideas lie. And you could even get this down to this. I hate to go this way, but you can go down to like a capitalism and socialism sort of thing, like central planning sort of thing. It's like where's the decisions made, and then how much information is available for those who are making the decision. So the people who wrote up the regulation, they're at the 10,000 foot level, and they've decided, they've come up with some numbers, and they're just painting a broad brush over everywhere. Whereas, and so that would be like the socialism model, sort of the central planning model. Now, I think one of the reasons why, capitalism is as productive as it is has to do with where the decision is made to open a business or to allocate resources. It's much, much closer to the actual demand. So like, someone in some town decides that this town, it's on the ground. They need like a hardware store or whatever, they've lived there, they've kind of felt it. That person, maybe they're not as smart as the ones who are in the central planning office, but they just are working with much more relevant information. And you can kind of take that same just kind of philosophical idea and apply it to these regulations. And this one with like the nursing staff, for instance, and say like the person on the ground can decide how many nurses they should have. It shouldn't be the government to decide how many nurses they have at what time and all these kind of details. Instead, the person who's running the nursing staff says, we are bound by regulation. We have to have this number of nurses, even though they're not doing anything, for instance. And it's driving us crazy. Again, I don't know the details. Like, I don't work in nursing. I don't know. But I'm just speaking kind of strictly from just like again, philosophical kind of thing.
Someone at 10,000 feet, like, how could they possibly know what the impact would be at a single institution, let alone nationwide, at every institution? And then you net that all up to, I don't know, what is it, like 287 there? Or it's just absurd. And like that was our conclusion, more or less, last week.
287 million, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that was our conclusion pretty much at the end of the last episode. These things are meaningless, effectively, once you like dig all the way down to like what exactly are people doing when they come up with this number. We don't know every detail of every assumption that went into some spreadsheet model that they ultimately published, each number on this page. But how precise are any of them?
I would be really, again, and we got to dive into briefly during the last episode how they came up with estimates for like inflation and sort of the level of analysis done there. And it's just kind of like
14 basis points, Luke.
And those are huge. And those are huge macroeconomic numbers. And the amount of thought seemingly that went into coming up with them wasn't even that deep. Now take that and like apply it to this, which is just a gazillion. Like, look how many, I'm on row 255 down here, and this just goes on, and there are a bunch of like the amount of work here, like how deep, how rigorous of the models are they using could it possibly be?
Right.
I'm so
every
curious.
One of those numbers have so many assumptions in them, and that's nothing to say of all the second order and third order interactions between every number on this page, which surely exist in the world, but we can't even like conceptualize of them, let alone accurately predict them or accurately estimate them, rather.
Yeah. So anyway, that's enough kind of crabbing on the CBO. I'm not suggesting I could do any better. I'm just saying these are kind of the things I'm thinking of when I look at this. Okay. Now let's look at the really juicy one. This is the one that's sort of plastered all over the news. The requirements for state to establish Medicaid, community engagement requirements. This has got some of the biggest numbers that are showing up. So this is in the millions. So we're looking at $344 billion over the next 10 years. Starts slow, but we're saving billions of dollars just starting in 2027, I guess. Now, I don't really want to look at the numbers. Again, I don't have any details to really look at and show you here, but I do want to look at the actual language because there's a lot of huffing and puffing over what this means. All right. So this is it. This is definitely one of the longest sort of sections. Like they added really a lot of new language. So we're able to read that without having to go drill down into the old law. To zoom in on this part, the community engagement compliance described. So they need to demonstrate that they're engaged in the community if they meet one of the following conditions. And so, 80 hours
All right, so that's like a half, just under half of a full-time job.
Community service. So community service counts. Work program, education program, at least half time. They need to be, any combination of these for not less of 80. So they can do a couple of these. One of the things they do is they do provide exceptions. So, they're kind of trying to be thoughtful here, I guess.
Otherwise been determined eligible, who's the parent, guardian, or caretaker with dependents 13 years or younger, a veteran with disability, medically frail, blind or disabled, substance abuse, mental disorder, physical, intellectual, developmental disability, serious or complex medical condition. That's very broad. So it's like the other thing I think the news glosses over is like, they like to make it come out and say that, helpless people are being forced to go out and do something now. But it's like very clearly there's like many, many carve outs.
Seemingly, in my read of it, trying to be considerate of all the edge cases to, so that probably what they're saying in the news doesn't happen.
Ensuring deceased individuals do not remain enrolled.
Let's take a look at that one.
Seems pretty reasonable.
Let's see. Further amended. The quarterly
screening. That's
disenrollment. Reinstatement of coverage in the event of error. There you go. Anyway, so they're going to call that like a... I wonder, let's take a look to see how much money this one was supposedly saved, actually. Look at that.
Nothing. Well,
there's an asterisk.
That just means that
hold on.
There's no fraud right now.
There's an asterisk. I like these asterisks. Let's go chase it down.
Corrected for a spreadsheet error.
Oh, okay, so they're just saying
so it's
some
just
tiny
minimal.
number.
That's
okay,
kind of odd.
interesting.
They're saying less than 500K.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder why they think that. It could be totally valid. Yeah. This section of reducing fraud, it's sort of like an acknowledgement by the CBO of this amount of fraud. It's like the CBO is saying there is this amount of fraud, in the system over 10 years. So I'm going to try to take a look at this to see how much fraud they expect to get over the next 10 years. And it's this 536 number, but you got to divide it by 2 because they're like double.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say, it's like 250 billion, they think, over 10 years through fraud. So I looked into this one briefly, but admittedly, all of these get pretty complicated. And there was a rule that was passed, I think, in the Biden administration that basically just tried to facilitate getting people onto Medicaid. That they wanted to cut red tape, make it really easy, and they put in all these, put into place maybe like you automatically enrolled for such and such, and you only need to show this ID, and you don't need this ID must be accepted, and it's like a student ID or whatever, and they're like going to take all that out. So I think actually, I really didn't know what to make of that. Because like the way the rule is written, it all makes it, that kind of makes sense to me, to like, if you want to get rid of this red tape, you want to make it easier, I guess, if someone needs it and isn't eligible. But like what this language had done had really just took all of that out. So arguably this number right here is not fraud. I necessarily, it's literally just making it harder.
Yeah.
It's just harder to sign up. And that's not good. If in fact they are like eligible.
I mean, but the other side is like, people that don't really need it are getting it too easily.
I don't know. In reading it, it could almost feel like one of those, similar to the non-tariff trade barriers. Remember that whole conversation where it's like, oh, they're beating us. It's not with tariffs. They're doing all these like sneaky things. Increasing red tape is one of them, just to like, quote unquote, save money. So here's one that I kind of prepared. So this is section, 1102. So this is the moratorium implementation of rule relating to the eligibility and enrollment in Medicaid. So they're saying the health and services, they will not during this period, again, over the next, almost 10 years, implement, administer, or enforce, by these rules. And then they list out which parts of the regulation that they're saying do not enforce these anymore. And one that I just pulled out kind of somewhat randomly is this one, 407. So what this one does is it talks about the types of acceptable documentary evidence of citizenship. And then like there's this big list, and they say the following must be accepted as sufficient evidence of citizenship. And they list out a bunch of things here. Some of these are pretty, straightforward. A passport. Some start getting, you can get into a little bit of an argument here.
The data match with the Social Security Administration.
Mm-hmm. And they say like evidence, and like that's okay. Then you get to evidence of citizenship. If an applicant does not provide the stuff from A, then it must be accepted as satisfactory. A public health birth certificate will, establish citizenship for these people. Certification of report of birth, a report of birth abroad of a U.S. citizen, certification of birth in the United States, a identification card, adoption degree, medical records, like some of these at the beginning, like they're looking pretty good. Some of these are getting a little dicey.
Life, health, or other insurance record that indicates U.S. place of birth. Now you're just like fully talking about
right. So
private
you see,
companies issuing
like,
information.
And like what this incoming regulation did is it just said this is all gone. On your, so now it's sort of throwing back to the states what is and is not kind of considered acceptable documentation. Right. Yeah. And that's going to translate into some kind of big numbers, because they would take that and say, okay, well, if some people, they can't show like school records, for instance, as like documentation, then they're no longer they don't have anything else, then they can't get the health care. I'm going to try to stay out of like the kind of debate, around, documented work and stuff. This is not trying to be a political debate. We're just looking at how they go from, the actual bill to spending cuts. And I just got to say, it's pretty hazy. So we were looking at this one. Those big numbers. And of course, that was only one. I mean, there was this huge long list of what they were cutting. So I'm not trying to say that all of that just came from, getting rid of the ID. There was a whole bunch of ones we didn't look into. But that's where the number came from. So what do you think, Joe? These spending cuts, are these the big Medicaid spending cuts?
I mean, appears to be, right? Is this the thing that's going to cause millions of people to die?
I don't think a whole lot's going to change, frankly. I think people are going to either kind of not enforce the change in the regulation, or people are going to find a different way around it. Or I just think in general, things are kind of roughly going to go on as before. I don't think, what could pass for community service? You know what I mean? It's kind of like another maybe annoying thing that they would have to do in order to comply with the regulation and sort of meet it, for instance.
Well, yeah, but I mean, now you've got someone doing community service.
But what I'm saying, it's like a BS community service. So then like the question is, what qualifies as community service?
Yeah, I mean, unless they're doing something that's like actively harming the community and it somehow gets counted as community service.
No, I wouldn't even go that far. Maybe I'll leave I kind of already sprinkled in, I think, enough of my opinion throughout this whole thing.
I mean, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of the people writing this, trying to cut spending. It's like the argument that, the administration that put this out makes is that, we're just taking people off of it that shouldn't have been there in the first place, right? That's the stated logic, whether that's true or not, or just plain, just totally politicking, whatever. But logically speaking, looking through, at least the things that we looked through, I mean, it seems reasonable as a goal that that's what they're trying to do. Now, whether you agree with that or not, I guess is, the more political question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I hope you can kind of take home this context, so these details, and have it in your mind when you listen and read about stuff in the news. and they'll say like they're cutting this, and you kind of know what that means now, and you can kind of judge for yourself whether or not that sounds a little BSy or that they don't know what they're talking about. But it's these kind of details that you want in your repertoire when you go out and face all of the BS that you have to face,
Something to talk
every
about
day.
at cocktail parties.
Yeah. Like,
Luke, what's
is
your
that true?
opinion
Doesn't
on these
quite-
supposed spending cuts?
Yeah, exactly. What's your
I
take?
don't think they're cuts at all.
Define cuts.
See, now that's something that my cousin Joey would talk about.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know why Joey has that voice, but he does. Must have to do with his ventriloquism syndrome. All right, Joe. That's all I got for you. But thanks for tuning in to the Root of All Evil podcast. My name's Luke.
I'm Joe.
See you next time.
See you then.